This is Al Jazeera.
Hello and welcome to the NewsHour. I'm Shakun Tilasantharan in Doha. Coming up in the program.
We would not only save lives, but we would reduce the threat to the region and reinforce an international standard.
The US and Russia agree on a deal to get rid of Syria's chemical weapons. A massive rescue effort is underway in Colorado to reach residents cut off by the worst floods in decades. Over 200 are missing. A ceasefire collapses, more than 50 dead in the Philippines as the army moves against rebel fighters.
And I'm Rahul Pathak. I'll have the day's top sports stories, including Floyd Money Mayweather lives up to his name as his latest world title fight looks like becoming the richest in boxing history.
A deal is done. The United States and Russia have reached an agreement to destroy or remove Syria's chemical weapons. After 3 days of talks in Geneva, Switzerland, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov have agreed to a 6-point plan. If Syria's President Bashar al-Assad fails to comply, it could be backed up with a UN resolution authorizing force.
If we can join together and make this framework a success and eliminate Syria's chemical weapons, we would not only save lives, but we would reduce the threat to the region and reinforce an international standard, an international norm. We could also lay the groundwork for further cooperation that is essential to end the bloodshed that has consumed Syria for more than 2 years.
Russia's foreign minister said that this was only the start of a long road, that there could be another international peace conference on Syria by next month.
In this approach agreed on, there is nothing said about the use of force or about any automatic sanctions. As I said, all violations should be approved in the Security Council convincingly, and we understand the decisions we have reached today is only the beginning of the road.
Meanwhile, the head of the opposition Free Syrian Army has rejected the deal, describing it as an initiative designed to gain time for the Syrian government.
We don't recognize the Russian initiative, and we think that the Russians and the Syrian regime are playing games to waste time and to win time for the criminal regime in Damascus. We think that our friends in the Western countries and in the United States know exactly the main goal of the Russian administration. They are trying to find a solution for the murderer regime in Damascus.
Well, for more on these developments, we'll speak to Anita McNaught, who is in Antakya, Turkey, and our diplomatic editor, James Bays, who is at the United Nations. But first, let's go to David Chater, who has been following those events in Geneva for us. And David, a very ambitious plan agreed to by the US and Russia.
Yes, this is an extraordinary breakthrough. Remember, only a week or so ago, we were thinking that Tomahawk cruise missiles were going to be launched from American and French ships in the Mediterranean inside Syria. Now, it looks like essentially 1,000 tons of a very dangerous chemical arsenal will be removed from the scene of the Syrian civil war. So let's take a closer look at exactly what was in the deal between the United States and Russia. Now, Assad's been given a week to hand over a full list of his chemical weapons stockpile. His government must allow chemical weapons inspectors unfettered access inside Syria by November. The goal is to destroy or remove the weapons by mid-2014. And if Assad doesn't cooperate, the US and Russia will seek a Security Council resolution where military action could be agreed upon. Now, this is a very important breakthrough for the United States and Russia, because they failed to get any peace talks going last time. Kerry and Lavrov met earlier this year in Moscow, which I attended that meeting. And this means it's a long and difficult road ahead, but it means essentially that if this all goes to plan, and that's a big if, of course, if it all goes to plan, then they could get a peace talk or a roundtable conference going with all sides in about a month's time. And that will mean a real breakthrough, a real chance of ending this whole conflict peacefully after 100,000 lives. Now back to you in the studio.
Thanks very much, David, for the details of that plan agreed to by the US and Russia. Let's speak now to Anita McNaught, who is in Turkey for us. And Anita, the head of the opposition Free Syrian Army, very angrily rejecting that plan in a press conference a short while ago in Istanbul.
Well, to say that Salim Idris was a skeptic on this American-Russian UN agreement would be to understate his position. As you heard in that soundbite from him a little earlier on, he feels that it's a delaying tactic, a device to buy time for the Assad regime while it continues, in his words, to pursue a campaign against Syrians by all other means that, in his view, are more severe than the chemical weapons attacks that the world is coming to grips with now. He rejects the Russian label of the people fighting against the regime in Syria as being terrorists, and says that in his view it's the Russians who are the terrorists for acting on behalf of Bashar al-Assad. And he laid some interesting accusations. He didn't source the intelligence for this in his press conference, but he suggested that the Syrian regime was moving some of its chemical weapons stocks already to hide them in Iraq and Lebanon, that they were preparing Scud missiles to be armed with some remaining stocks to fire at locations on the Turkish border and in Aleppo. And he felt that, indeed, the killing would continue at a much greater rate. So not at all convinced by this. 2014, far too late. Not convinced it will happen at all, and not satisfied with this move.
Anita, thank you. Let's speak now to James Bays, who is at UN headquarters in New York for us. And James, any reaction from the United Nations to this development?
No formal reaction here on a Saturday, early on a Saturday at the United Nations. But I think the idea that we have here, that Syria's chemical weapons could be put beyond use, was one that was unthinkable a week ago. Despite that, I think you're going to find some Western diplomats, particularly I think from the UK and France, who will be a little uneasy about what has been decided in Geneva. I think what they wanted was a binding UN Security Council resolution for all of this that meant that if there was any violation, it would automatically, legally allow for the use of force. What we have now is a deal that if there's a violation, they come back to the Security Council to try and get that Chapter 7 resolution. Well, that could happen any time. That's the normal procedure here at the United Nations. And I think the problem is this. What if there is a violation, days, weeks away from now, and there's a dispute between the US and the Western powers and Russia and whether it really was a breach? You get that sort of dispute, you go to the Security Council. If Russia says, no, this wasn't a real violation, this was just a technical difficulty, then they can veto any military action. There isn't that automatic threat of military action, and I think some of the Western nations very, very wary about that and about Russia. Just listen to what the US ambassador here at the United Nations said a week ago about Russia. She said, Russia has blocked every relevant action in the Security Council, even mild condemnations of the use of chemical weapons. And she went on to say that the August 21st attack only occurred because President Assad felt that Russia would have Syria's back in the Security Council.
James, thanks very much once again.